Whenever I would see a man use the phrase that women need to choose better or pick better men, I would immediately brush it off as being dismissive because that's what it is. But I started to look at it differently when I started seeing posts from single moms asking girlfriends of men with kids, how do y'all sit around so comfortably while your man don't do nothing for his kids? And the girls will be in the response, the comments like, oh, that ain't my responsibility, that ain't my business. And I just want to say, sis, it's not about it not being your responsibility or being your business, but why are you not doing an accurate character assessment? Not think critically enough to say like, a man that ain't involved with his kids, what does that say about his character? Don't come up under my post talking about baby mamas be bitter sometimes, baby mama be keeping him away from the kids. Bro, it is 2022, 2023. Quit picking and choosing what lies suit your interests. When men say women need to...
The nuclear family is one of the defining symbols of Western culture. Although established long before the 1950s, the time period which thrived most on the concept of providing father, doting housewife to take care of the kids, helped to solidify the idea of the patriarchal family unit, which serves to isolate women from one another. However, in the past 40 years, the traditional nuclear family has been supplemented by a rising population of single mothers. Single mothers are women who are in single-income households with one or more children. As of 2021, there were an estimated 9.8 million single mothers in the United States, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, which represents about 80% of all single-parent households in the country. Despite being the parents who stayed, single mothers are treated with derision and disrespect, and often are denied the resources they need to be successful in providing a happy life for their kids, which contrasts sharply with how society treats single fathers in comparison. Single mothers are systematically mistreated and punished in many ways. Many penalties exist to punish single individuals. One example of this is paying more in taxes, as single people are taxed at a higher percentage than married people making the same amount of money. Single people receive less in Social Security because married people can draw from a living spouse's benefits and also receive a deceased spouse's benefits. Two incomes can provide more funding for everyday expenses and long-term savings as well. While this penalty affects all single people, it affects single mothers even more as they have dependents to take care of. It's no surprise then that many single mothers are poverty-stricken. According to recent statistics from the U.S. Census Bureau, single mother households have a poverty rate of 29.5%, which is more than twice the rate for households of married couples. Single mothers are also more likely to have lower incomes and experience financial hardship, with a median income of $35,000 compared to $85,000 for married couples. Additionally, they may face discrimination in the workplace, limited job opportunities, and unequal pay. Single mothers also may not have access to paid leave for maternity or medical purposes, which can lead to further financial strain and job insecurity. According to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, only 60% of working single mothers have access to paid sick leave, and only 37% have access to paid family leave. The poverty single mothers face is exacerbated by stigma and discrimination, as the National Partnership for Women and Families found that single mothers are more likely to experience discrimination in the workplace, such as being passed over for promotions or being paid less than their male counterparts. According to a report by the Institute for Women's Policy Research, the majority of single mothers in the United States are low income, with 46.2% living below the poverty level and another 26.4% living in low-income communities.
I need y'all to quit saying that single mothers aren't accountable, because accountability looks like raising your child, even if that means you got to do it by yourself. That sometimes you cry yourself to sleep because you ain't got no motherfucking help. Nobody want to babysit this kid, so half the time you don't have a social life. You struggle because you got to pick between whether I get my nails done or whether my kid gets to go to football practice today. That's what accountability looks like. Somehow I'm gonna stretch this dollar I got and make it into eggs, milk, make it into covers. I don't know how. I got to work 48 hours in 2 days, but I'm gonna make it to a PTA meeting. I'm gonna call in, make sure his homework is done. That's what accountability looks like. So quit saying that single mothers are not being accountable for their actions. Accountability means you take care of your responsibility no matter how the they got here. What y'all need to do is start talking to these deadbeat ass niggas about accountability, because y'all seem to protect them far more than you protect single moms.
Only 27.4% of single mother families are classified as middle or high income. This suggests that single mothers are more likely to be in the lower socioeconomic classes compared to other family types. In addition, there exists a social stigma against single mothers which suggests they are irresponsible, promiscuous, or unable to provide a stable home environment for their children. They may be judged for not being able to provide for their family without a partner's financial support, and they may also face criticism for not being able to devote enough time and attention to their children due to their work and other responsibilities. Even if they are well off financially, they are judged to a higher degree for failing to keep a partner and for splitting attention between financing the household and childcare. The single mother is one of the best examples of the lie that women can have it all. With the lack of resources and support that women have regarding childcare, in addition to discrimination in the workplace, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, to attain the high standards that women are expected to meet in both the domestic and public sphere. It is impossible to give 100% to both work and family life. While men are praised for making a paltry effort at parenting, women are expected to put in so much more to be considered satisfactory. It will be possible to both work and have a family if there are resources to help with the burden of duties. However, financially, single mothers may lack access to affordable childcare, affordable housing, and adequate health insurance. In terms of emotional and social support, single mothers may struggle with isolation and lack of time for self-care as they have to balance their work and parenting responsibilities. Many like to point this out as a racial issue, spurred on by the welfare queen persona first invented in the 1980s by the Reagan-led right. As Bryce Covert writes in The Myth of the Welfare Queen, as Ronald Reagan and other politicians ginned up anti-government and anti-poor resentment in the 1970s and 80s, the welfare queen stood in for the idea that black people were too lazy to work, instead relying on public benefits to get by, paid for by the rest of us upstanding citizens. She was promiscuous, having as many children as possible in order to beef up her benefit take.
In 1976, when Ronald Reagan pursued the Republican presidential nomination, he repeatedly told the story of an African-American woman named Linda Taylor, claiming she was earning more than $150,000 a year by cheating social services, holding her up as an example of liberal policies gone wrong.
Well, compared to some of you white people, I think I've done pretty damn good to be black.
The story grabbed attention, but had little basis in reality. Taylor was a con artist, and not at all representative of the typical welfare recipient.
The welfare queen image is a manufacture of Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party using only one story from Chicago in the 1970s of one woman who scammed something from the system, and it's not entirely clear all that she scammed.
There's this notion that 99% of the welfare money in this society is going to black and Hispanics. It's wrong. It's bogus. Because the majority of people on welfare are white. The majority of people on food stamps are white.
Oh, what a fact. It's a nice fact. It's very interesting.
Reagan's attack on welfare marked a significant change. Since the Great Depression, the federal government had offered aid to poor people, the majority of whom were white. Now, in financially insecure times, Reagan hinted that those programs, paid for by tax dollars, were only aiding black people. And he promised that cutting them would help fix the economy.
This is a turning point, not only in the history of black people, but it's a turning point in the ways in which people can talk about poverty. Because we've moved from this idea of the deserving poor to the undeserving poor. And it's very much a kind of emphasis upon morality and moralism and all these kinds of things that are much more invested in the idea of individual failure than asking how did we wind up with this population of impoverished people in the first place.
It was always a myth. White people have always made up the majority of those receiving government checks, and if anything, benefits are too miserly, not too lavish. But it was a potent stereotype which helped fuel a crackdown on the poor and a huge reduction in their benefits, and it remains powerful today. The woman who Reagan lauded as the welfare queen was a real woman named Linda Taylor, who was a biracial woman born to a white mother at a time in which interracial relationships were illegal. She was raised at a disadvantage due to both the poverty of her family, who were poor sharecroppers, and the racism she faced as a biracial woman, which prevented her from completing anything past a second-grade education. She had her first child at 14 and faced charges of promiscuity. This occurred during a time when authorities attempted to control quote-unquote loose women and venereal disease through criminalizing sex outside of marriage. As a result of the difficulties of her lack of education, race, and criminal background, she found it difficult to find meaningful employment to support herself and her 5 kids. This wasn't helped by her apparent mental illness, as several psychiatrists reported that she was psychotic and incapable of defending herself in court. As Covert reports, she certainly perpetrated welfare fraud, showing up to aid offices and describing hardships she hadn't experienced and children she didn't have to get expedited checks from the Aid to Families with Dependent Children program, the cash welfare program now known as Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. In September of 1974, the Chicago Tribune wrote a report about her welfare fraud, which shifted national attention to her case, which in turn led to a crackdown of welfare fraud around the country. This rhetoric helped push Reagan into the White House. All the while, the biggest problem with the program was not that people were cheating the system with elaborate Taylor-style schemes, but that the system was cheating them. An in-depth examination of AFDC in the Chicago area in 1960 found that the biggest problem was public hostility to the most disadvantaged segment of our population. A 1970 Associated Press report found that 39 states were illegally denying the poor either due to process or deserved relief benefits. If there was an epidemic of fraud, it was almost certainly more prevalent among white-collar people such as doctors, billing Medicaid, or civil servants who collected both salaries and benefits. A 1978 federal report found that just 1% of the annual budget of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was lost to unlawful, willful misrepresentation or excessive services and program violations. Less than $500 million of the agency's losses were in AFDC. Most instances of people getting money despite being ineligible were honest mistakes. This topic is explored in greater depth in The Queen, A Forgotten Life Behind an American Myth by Josh Levin, which details the racialization of the welfare queen persona and the effect it has had on public programs ever since. This has had long-standing effects wherein black women are judged for having multiple children or children by multiple fathers, a judgment which is only doled out by certain lines of wealth and race. This racial bias is at least partially unfounded for those previously stated reasons, and because, according to the U.S. Census Bureau's 2020 current population study, among single mothers with children under 18 years old, 39.5% are white, 25.8% are black or African American, 22.3% are Hispanic or Latino, 5.3% are Asian, and 4.8% are of two or more races. This bias has influenced public perception of single mothers and the help they should receive. Being a single mother should not be an automatic death sentence to a mother's chances for prosperity. With the community centered around protecting children and helping with the burden of childcare, it becomes far easier to raise a child. After all, a common adage states that it takes a village. However, the Reagan era not only villainized single mothers who used governmental support and welfare programs, but harmed the American sense of community through his popularization of the stranger danger panic. This began with the disappearance of Eaton Pats in 1979, whose image was plastered in high definition across the city of New York and eventually on milk cartons. Panic caused misrepresentations of the nature of child abductions to spread, namely that the number one perpetrators were strangers and that the number of abductions secretly numbered in tens of thousands. This led to a middle-class stranger danger panic wherein many families moved to the suburbs, created a rise of homophobia and a rise of mass incarceration. As Megan Day writes in How the Stranger Danger Panic of the 1980s Helped Give Rise to Mass Incarceration, the Reagan administration, which had made family values and law and order two of its most central themes, found that the stranger danger panic combined them perfectly. While much of the legislation passed during this time was well-meant and in response to heinous crimes, many were ineffective, as they did not address the fact that most abuse happens to people known to the family rather than strangers, or was an example of legislative overreach. During this period, the notion that the only nuclear family was capable of safeguarding a child became firmly established, discouraging people from living collaboratively with an extended community who could help lessen the burden of childcare, which often doesn't occur in nuclear or single-parent households. Knowing all of this, it appears as if governments, namely of the U.S. and other Western countries, do not want women to have children. And yet, as the birth rates continue to decline, governments around the globe are ringing the alarm bells about the aging population and the lack of new babies to replace them. The global fertility rate, which is the average number of children a woman is expected to have during her lifetime, has declined from 4.7 in 1950 to 2.4 in 2017, according to the United Nations.
Women would rather be single than be with Mr. Wrong or Mr.
Oh, I've been saying this for a while and now researchers are confirming it, that what's happening are two things. Let's start with the easy one. Women have always been told to pick better. Guess what's happening? They're picking better. How many times have women been left out in the cold to raise children by themselves or have an unfair share of the workload inside their homes? They're basically married single mothers doing all of the childcare responsibilities. But we're told, pick better men. And the second part is we finally have the internet. We have a tool that goes across borders, across boundaries, and we can share our truthful stories. So right now, this is the most empowering time for women where we actually have the decision-making power to say, is this something that I want? Do I want to be carrying the lion's share of parenting? And many are saying no.
This decline has come along with a rise in anti-natalist sentiment, which has become increasingly popular with younger people regarding family planning.
if you're a parent, scroll ahead. This is not about you. But you gotta be some special kind of delusional to think you can protect a child in this world. From exploitation, from anti-trans hatred, from environmental degradation. Meanwhile, all of my children are chilling in the void, never experiencing an ounce of pain ever. That was my gift to them and one of my greatest accomplishments on this earth. You're welcome, babies.
Anti-natalism refers to the belief that it is morally wrong or unjustifiable for people to have children. Philosophically, anti-natalism is often in response to the ecological and social problems caused by overpopulation, as limiting population growth is one way to address the depletion of natural resources, environmental degradation, and the difficulties of attending the needs of a growing population. For women, this is often a particularly subversive stance, as pressure to have kids still very much exists, with the argument being that women will regret not having kids, creating a pressure to have children even if one is unsure if they want them. These lowering rates are attributed to several reasons, which include women's education, lifestyle impediment of parenthood, women's empowerment in the workplace, availability of contraceptives, urban living, survival being less dependent on family, a decline of religion, declining child mortality, and the rising cost of child rearing. Many of the things listed as impacting the lowering birth rate are positive changes for the female population, like education and workplace empowerment. If a decreased birth rate comes as a result of these things, why is it considered a negative? There is an assumption that all women want to have children and that even those who are reluctant do not regret having done so. This is not true. If birth rates have decreased due to an increase in education and work opportunities, that is because women are no longer forced to rely on reproductive and sexual value to men in order to survive, and are able to understand both how reproduction works and the consequences of having a child. While cultural pressure to have children still exists and remains a strong influence on a woman's decision to have a child, for many this no longer outweighs the personal detriment of doing so. As Orna Donath writes in Regretting Motherhood, historical and cultural notions trap women under an illusional absence of choice following our biological sex, as society uses the language of nature in order to persuade us to conceive and give birth, often to the point of biological tyranny. This refers to the assumption that the reproductive potential of women's anatomy obligates us to become mothers. We are passively ruled by a fatalist command that leaves us no other choice. In other words, women face the pressure to have children because we have the ability to do so, and are oppressed and valued for this ability under the patriarchy. Maternal regret is often unheard of, not because it doesn't exist, but because it is treated as an impossibility and rarely, if ever, is openly discussed.
When I read the study Regretting Motherhood by Orna Donath, mothers who admit regret shot up to number 1 on the list of people who I respect most in the world. And that probably sounds really weird to anybody who hasn't read the study, but you need to read it to understand or listen to it. Because the truth is that we commodify and borderline fetishize motherhood from day one for people who can give birth. And I know this because I've been exposed to it from day one, and I knew from a very young age that I was never meant to be a parent. But if I had given into that socialization, that pressure, that commodification, because it is tempting sometimes, it does look like a fairy tale sometimes. If I had given into that, I would be in a position right now that I don't know if I would even survive. And that's why parents who admit their regret, especially mothers, have my utmost respect.
The message that motherhood is the right choice for all women, both because of benefits and because of the judgment placed on women who don't have children, which prophesies an empty, dull, tormented life charged with regret and absent of meaning of substance, is one that is hard to escape. This concept stems from a belief that all decisions are made without coercion, of free will and of individual choice, and ignores the impact of cultural norms, morals, and social forces. When women become aware of these forces and have avenues which allow them to avoid some of the harsher punishments enacted on women for not conforming to gendered expectations, not all can escape so easily. As Orna Donath writes, for many women, they have absorbed the notion that motherhood is the only path to the point that we cannot conceive of other available options, making the only decision that can be imagined appear to have come from a pure space. Quite simply, declining birth rates are detrimental to a capitalist economy, which presents women as producers of further products. Consumers, who will grow to purchase and create more consumers, and who will have to man the jobs needed to create these products. Capitalism requires a constantly growing workforce to sustain its ever-continuing growth, without allowing or prioritizing the needs of the family. In other words, it creates the situation that is preventing families from growing today. If countries really wanted to encourage population growth, they would enact policies that support family growth. This would include affordable and accessible childcare, paid family leave, affordable housing, accessible healthcare, and increased social and financial support for mothers. Mothers have always been a major part of the feminist movement, and for good reason. Childbirth is an ability that only women possess, and thus have been punished and judged for both doing so and failing to do so. It remains one of the major goals of the feminist movement to address the stigma and difficulties that single mothers, and all mothers, face, and should be one of the goals that governments concerned with population growth address as well. Unfortunately, it is often cheaper to force women to have no other option than childbirth than it is to create the social programs needed to help these women and their children have good lives. This, dear viewers, is where we part. This is one topic that I've always been very interested in because as a nanny, I work for a lot of single mothers. My mom and my dad got divorced when I was younger, and they were separated for quite some time. So my mom was effectively a single mom for a while. And the judgment placed on single mothers is awful, considering that they're the parents who stayed. Why don't you have this energy for the men who left? And that's something that's always been a big frustration to me, because on top of all that, you get a lot of anti-feminist rhetoric saying that, like, if feminists don't want women to become mothers, when that's a personal choice, that no feminist is going to say, oh, it's anti-feminist to have a kid. But the fact is, the world itself is hostile to childbearing, which is one of the reasons why women aren't having as many kids, because A, they have the option not to for the first time ever, and B, because even if they do want to, can they afford to? Will they be able to outweigh the benefits of having a kid with the detriments that has financially, socially? I think that especially with all this talk, like a lot of younger people are anti-natalist, which I think is a decent standpoint considering that it's really just don't have kids and they're not advocating for murder or anything, but so many governments are so frustrated about this because they don't like the idea of the global south or third world countries outnumbering first world countries and then creating this labor shortage when it shouldn't be an issue. It really shouldn't be an issue that women no longer feel coerced to have children. And if you want to encourage them to have kids, then you should have benefits instead of just taking away the ability to abort. But that's a whole other discussion. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know. This week's password is The Walking Dead, because that's what I'm going to watch when I am editing this. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.